Jesse asked me to share my testimony. Oh, by the way, can you hear me before I continue? I think.
Now we can hear you clearly.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, so Sister Jesse asked me to come and share my testimony, and so I I will I will do that. So, as Sister Dorothy, I don't know if she's here today, she gave me a glowing introduction last week. And I thought, okay, I got to put a disclaimer to that. So we go way back. I was born in Kenya, Kamagambo. And actually, Sister Edwina is my auntie. But I went to boarding school, and that's where I met Dorothy. So we were really young. We were very young at the time. And so when I look back, I see the hand of God in almost every part of my life, way back when we were, like maybe 10, less than 10 years old in boarding school. And so from boarding school Nyabondo, we went to Asumbi Girls. But the miracle for me was that I passed the list of all the girls who went from Nyabondo to Asumbi. They all did better than me. I barely squeaked in. Basically, I feel like the Lord squeaked me in and I made it. Everybody did better than me. And so at Asumbi, again, the Lord was good. And again, Sister Dorothy gave me a glowing testimony. I was like, oh no, I am here by the grace of God. I'm not that smart. I am just here because the Lord made a way for me to be here. So again, at Asumbi, we finished all the way to Form 4, and there were only 3 people that had first division. There's 2 of us who went to Alliance Girls, and then of course of those 2, I had the least. But when we went to Alliance Girls, the miracle was that we met girls who had been at Alliance, who had been at, they all had, some girls had like 7 ones, 8 ones. We barely made it. We never even had a 1. In fact, I think I had the worst score of all the girls that, in that year, in that batch. So that was again another miracle of the Lord that opened the door for me to go to a very good institution at the time. And like I think the our headmistress, I think, had to plead with the headmistress at Alliance Girls to take us because we were coming from rural schools. So I see that as a hand of God. While we were at Asumbi, we accepted the Lord on the same day, Dorothy and myself. We grew up, we didn't know about accepting the Lord. In the Catholic schools, we were taught to go to the Mass. We did the rosary every night. We went to Mass every morning. So we were in that culture. We went to Asumbi Girls. It was, again, Catholic culture. But by the grace of God, somebody came and taught about salvation and about the gospel. And we gave our lives to the Lord the same day. And I feel that the trajectory of our lives changed at that time. And as you know, Sister Dorothy, who's been part of this community, she went on and became a reverend. I stuck with the academic side. So anyway, by the grace of God, went and did my Bachelor of Pharmacy at the University of Nairobi. And I was practicing as a pharmacist in Kenya and Mombasa. And so I was in private practice where at the culture at the time, there was no way for people to go for further studies. And so one day we see an advert in the newspapers, we are taking professionals, we're giving them scholarships to go study outside. And so I just put in my application, like, there's no way I'll get this. Let me just put it in. By the grace of God, I was among the finalists. There was a batch of us, and they took people from different professions. They are doctors, they are pharmacists, they are bankers, all different professions, engineers, and we all had scholarship to come to the United States. So I feel like that again was the hand of God intervening. I did not know anybody on the selection team. I did not know anybody with the people who had the scholarship. But I ended up being among the finalists. So that was a big miracle. So I ended up coming to the United States for further studies, got a master's degree. When I finished my master's degree, that was another miracle because they told me, They asked me, do you want to stay for PhD? I said, no, I don't want to stay because my husband is at home with my children. The stipulation of the scholarship was you cannot bring your family with you. You had to stay here, complete your studies, go back to Kenya. And I said, no, I don't want to go back to Kenya. I don't want to stay here. Well, by a miracle of the Lord, so I went to the School of Farm and said, okay, I finished my education. Can you help me find an attachment? And the person I talked to said, do you want to do a PhD? I'm like, no, not really. It's like, no, no, no. We can give you a scholarship. Just come. This guy literally took me, walked me to the graduate school. I talked to the dean, the graduate school, the dean of graduate school at that time was a priest who had been at the University of Nairobi. We sat down. He asked me about how things were going in Kenya. He signed my papers and told me, go back to class tomorrow. Just like that. Again, major, major miracle of the Lord. So at this point, after I received that, I entered the class late. And so I didn't have any scholarship, but I had the opportunity to continue with class. So I asked them for my permission to go back home to Kenya, at least see my family before I start doing this PhD program. And I talked to my sponsors and they said, well, you just come back home first. We'll talk about it when you get home. So I went back home. I was home, I think, for like maybe 2 weeks or so. And I went to the embassy, and the embassy, by some miracle, approved. What I didn't know is that when they heard that I had an opportunity to do a PhD program, they wrote to the embassy and said, don't let this woman go back to the United States. However, those two buildings where my sponsors were and the embassy, where the old embassy, older people probably remember where it was, younger people may have forgotten, they were in the same block. But their letter took like days to get to the embassy. So I went to the embassy. They approved for me to come and to come back. In fact, they approved for me to come back with my son. And so I came back, and again, God did many, many miracles. So my husband could come because the PhD program is quite long. So could come with our children who are left in Kenya. When my husband went to the embassy, they said, are you sure your wife is in the United States? She's not supposed to be there. Who let her go there? Here's a letter from her sponsor saying she can't go back to the United States. She needs to be here. So my husband really didn't want to come. He's like, okay, if you don't want me to go, that's fine. And he just left them and went back to Mombasa. So a couple of days, they called him and said, you know what? It's not your wife's fault that she's back in the United States. We are the ones who let her go. So we will give you and your children, you can go join her. And so again, another miracle. So they joined us in the United States. The minute he got to the United States, the year he got to the United States, so before that, if you had an F2 visa, you could work. When he came with the children, my visa was changed from J to F. They changed the rules so that F2 could not work. So here we are with 3 small children, minimum stipend. I'm doing research in the lab. I work in the lab for hours and hours. We could barely make it. And if somebody had told me this is what was going to happen, I would have said no, I never would have come back. So it was really tough. We couldn't even pay our rent. We had family members sending us, food so we could survive. So our children could eat. Another cousin was helping us pay, for our rent. So, to park our car because it snows a lot where I live in Nebraska. It would snow a lot at the time. So it was a really, really tough time. And my husband was having a very tough time because he came from being an officer working for the government to coming here where he couldn't work because they said, F2 visa, you can't work anymore. So with that, we just continue to struggle. And I think for his part of the testimony, he said he reached a point of surrender. He came to a point where he just said, Lord, I give up. I give up. I can't do this anymore. I just give up. Have your will and your way. When he gave up, when he said, when he surrendered, believe it or not, that very month, we got the visa lottery. He got the visa lottery. We had applied, somebody had told us about it, we applied. And so going on from there, they got, they had green card for the entire family. Again, they look at my files, they say, you are not supposed to be in the United States. You have to go back home. You promised you'd go back home after you finish your first degree. We can't let you, we can't give you your papers. So all my family, they got their green cards, my children, my husband. I was stuck with my F1. But again, that was the goodness of God, because what happened is that the month that we got the green card, I was doing research, I was doing research on a grant. The grant funding ran out. So at the end of the month, it's a measly amount of money. We can barely pay rent. My husband's go to the bank and they say, there's no money. There's no money that came in. So I went back to my boss and said, how come there's no money? We can't even pay our rent. And it's like, oops, the grant ran out. They didn't tell me. But that was the month that we got a green card. And for that green card to be approved, immigration told my husband, come back with a pay stub. So he had to find a job quickly, do anything that he could do so he could have a pay stub that he could go to so that we could get our green card approved. And so those two things happened at the same time. My stipend is stopping. He is getting his green card. He's beginning to work. It would have taken just a few days. We would have been homeless. And in fact, I remember at the time it was so difficult that one night I went, as our university is a big chapel, it's a Catholic university. I was studying at night and life was so rough. I went and sat in the chapel. They kept the chapel door open. And I cried and cried and cried. And I said, Lord, why do you hate me? Like what on earth? Why do you hate me and my family? Why do you hate us? Why can't you help us? I cried for almost an hour. And then with a still small voice, it's just the Lord. I felt like the Lord say, I love you. You are also my child. I love you. And in fact, it was after that, I went and looked for a church. I just said, somebody tell me where I can find a good church where I could go. So all of those things were happening at the same time. So my husband is getting his green card and God is doing things in my heart, in my life, breaking my heart. We're all being drawn to the Lord. And so we saw so many small miracles, so many miracles. I say small, but they're not small. It's simple things like we didn't have a car that we could drive. We had a beat up car that you drive, it's snowing, you have to stop and scrape off the snow before you can drive. And so we would pray at night before we go to bed, Lord, would you please give us a new car? Lord, would you give us a car that we can drive so we don't have to walk in the cold, in the middle of the cold when it's snowing? And believe it or not, one day I get a letter in my mail. They say, okay, we have this discount program for graduate students. If you're a graduate student, we'll get a new car and you're only paying something like $130 a month. Brand new car, brand new Toyota. That was answer to a prayer. We were shocked because we went to look for a car and people would laugh at us and send us out. And then all of a sudden I get this letter which says, hey, if you're a graduate student, we'll give you funding. We'll give you a brand new car. Just pay $130 a month or something like that. And so that was another miracle that happened just like that. Anyway, so time goes on. I get my PhD, I complete my program, get my PhD. Now it's time to look for a job. Again, we ran into the same problem. They said, immigration says, you must go home because your sponsor said you have to go home before you can step back on the ground, on the soil in the United States. So I go back home and I leave my children here and my husband here in the United States. And they said, in fact, they said, Madam, do you understand English? You're not going to step on American soil for at least 3 years, So, they sent me home. All right. So when I went home then, so I would go to my sponsor's office almost every day. Can you please give me a waiver? They said, no, come today, like every week, come back this day, come back that day, get a waiver from the university, give a waiver from the government, sending me around in circles. In the meantime, we were praying up a storm. My church here was praying in the United States. I was praying with the church that I was attending in Kenya. I was praying. If there was a prayer meeting in the morning, I was there. If there was a prayer meeting at lunchtime, I was there. And in fact, so at that time, I was also expecting our youngest child. So what happened is that at this point now I'm in Kenya. I have 3 terminal degrees. I have a Bachelor of Pharmacy, I have an MBA, I have a PhD. I cannot get a job. And there was one prophet who was praying for us at the time. And he said, Kathy, you will never get a job in this country. God wants you to go back and work where your children are. You'll not get a job. And so I tarmacked and tarmacked. There was no job. I went to the university, all this university and another university, and they're like, okay, we're working on it, we're working on it. So the miracle that God did there is that this lady who wrote a letter to the United States Embassy and said, don't let her come back. In the middle of all of this, I mean, people were praying for us, like so many people were praying. There were people who had my family as their, saving on the computer, on the homepage on the computer, so that every time they see, they pray for us. There were people praying for us. It was just the grace of God. This lady who refused to let me come back, she got a lateral transfer. She was a Kenyan lady who had the senior position with this funding body. They brought in there a lady from the United States. When I went to see her, now this is like almost a year. I've been home now for almost a year. When I went to see her, she looked at my papers and she said, if you are an economist, if you had a PhD in economy, I would not let you go back because this country needs economists. Your PhD is in pharmacology. This country doesn't need pharmacologists. There are enough pharmacologists at the University of Nairobi. Go back and stay with your children. So she gave me a waiver after 1 year. She wrote the letter that said, so with that letter, I could go to the embassy, and the embassy then they could now start processing my visa. So I got the waiver. That was a major miracle because this lady put her foot down and said, you are not stepping on American soil. You are going to stay here for a minimum of 2 years. You're lucky if you go back in 3 years. Well, God did another miracle, and it was a prayer storm. We were praying. People were praying for us all over. So then once now I get approved, and so my baby has been born, I go to get my papers. So what happened is that my husband had to convert from green card to citizen, so I could come on a green card visa. But what happened is that the baby was born 2 weeks before my husband got his citizenship. So when I went to get a green card for both of us, they said, well, your green card will only apply to you because when your child was born, the father had a green card, he was not a citizen, so you have to start from the beginning for the child. So they refused to let the child. Said the child, this is an intending immigrant. He cannot go back to the United States with you. He's staying in Kenya. And so the conditions, again, there were other complications that made it necessary for me to come back here because even the rental property where we stayed was under my name because I'm the one who was here first, who was in the United States first. So anyway, the miracle happened. I got my green card to come back. To come back to the United States, but the baby was left in Kenya. They refused to give me a visa for my son. So I come to the United States. We continue praying and praying. So the child is less than a year, left him in Kenya when he was less than a year. So we would have a prayer meeting. The prayer meeting was in our house. We would have a prayer meeting every Thursday. And the group, one of the things we were praying for was for the baby to get the visa, for the papers to come out. Well, his papers got stuck. So when I came back, we applied for his papers. It just got stuck. And so I had my senators from my state. I had my congressman, the politicians. We were going through the politicians so that they could process his papers so he can join us. So one day when we were praying in this meeting, we had a lady I had some friends who were very prophetic. One lady says, I see the papers. They've been pulled. His papers are lost, but I see them being pulled from the bottom of the stack. They've been pulled to the top of the stack. So I called the senator's office on Monday. They used the same language. They said, oh, we found his papers. They were pulled from the bottom of the stack to the top of the stack. We are processing his papers. So now we are working on it. All right. Big miracle. So then it would go from one office, goes to the next office. It gets stuck there. We pray and pray. God brings the word. The papers have been found. The papers are being found. We'd say, oh, they were found. We've taken it to the next step. Eventually, the papers went to Kenya. The papers were, was taken to Kenya, so the U.S. Embassy in Kenya, so then we could go get the baby. All right. So I go now to Kenya to get the baby because now they said papers are fine, come and get the, everything is fine. So I went to Kenya. Believe it or not, the day we got his papers, that was the day 9/11 happened. So I'm coming from the embassy with the baby. By the time I reach my cousin's out, everybody's gathered around the TV. And they say, do you see what's happening in America? Do you see what has happened? The towers have come down. So now this is afternoon, late afternoon in Kenya. It's still morning in New York where the 9/11 happened. And guess what? All embassies were shut, which means that had I been late just one day, we never would have gotten his papers. But his papers were approved. They said, come back to the gate. You'll get his visa and his passport at the gate when you come back. So I went back. When we were told to go back, his papers were at the gate. So we missed that by inches. And then after the embassy happened, now no flights. Nobody can go back to, nobody can travel. So that was like about 2 weeks or so. I had 2 weeks after I got his papers. Nobody could travel. The day we were leaving was the first day people were allowed to travel out of the country back to the United States. And they didn't stop us. They didn't say, okay, people haven't traveled 2 weeks, you're not traveling. They let us come back. And so it was a miracle that we were able to board the plane and make it back to the United States. And we barely missed that shutdown of 9/11. So that was another miracle. There were just so many miracles. I remember even traveling on the way. I was going through Middle Eastern countries. I think going from Oman to Dubai. I have a little child. I have baby bottles. I have bags here, and I don't speak the language. And as I'm getting out of one place, somebody comes and says, he didn't tell me anything. He just started helping me, gathered my things that were fallen all over, scattered on the ground. After I got off the flight, I'm carrying the baby. And so he walks me to the next flight where I was going. I turned around to say thank you. He disappeared. He just disappeared. In the meantime, here in the United States, the Lord woke up one of my friends and said, pray for Catherine. She's traveling. She's traveling in the Middle East. She's in the Middle East. Things are not so good. Wake up and woke her up in the middle of the night and asked me. The Lord said, pray for Catherine. So she told me that after I got here. So anyway, so we managed. We made it back. Another miracle, after we came back here, after I came back now, I needed to find a job. So, I didn't finish the job. The job, I couldn't find a job in Kenya. The day I got my green card, I received a letter of appointment at the university, I think in Eldoret. They were just opening a medical school there. That's when I got my letter of appointment. The miracle was, had I received this letter before I got my visa, I never would have come back to the United States. I'd said, okay, I already have a job. I'm going to be a professor at the university, in Eldoret. I already have a job. The Lord did not let me have a job in Kenya until I got my green card. And so I understood why this prophet who was praying for me kept saying, Kathy, you will never find a job in Kenya. Don't even bother looking for a job. God has a job for you when you go back. And so, again, that was the hand of God at work. Anyway, so eventually I come back. And now I'm with the baby. I'm looking for a job. I'm traveling to the East Coast. I'm going, traveling all over, putting my papers everywhere, nothing doing. So then the university where I went to, where I did my PhD, we were expanding the school, and the dean of the school, the dean goes to my boss and says, do you think Catherine wants a job? We have some openings here. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Do you think Catherine wants a job? Of course I want a job. I need a job. We have children. We have to pay rent. We have to move into a bigger house. Well, that job was totally miraculous. In fact, there was somebody who prayed for me way before that, and he said, I see you in the spring. The Lord has a gift for you when in the spring, which is in around May, April. And I thought, the Lord has a gift for me. At that time, I was praying for all my family to know the Lord, to serve the Lord. So in my heart, I was saying, yeah, God is answering my prayer. All of my family, I've been praying for them for years. I want them to know the Lord. I want them to be Christians. So I thought that was the gift God had for me.
Well, turns out it was the job. They actually come and said, we need somebody, we need more people. We are hiring more faculty. Are you interested? They said, bring your papers. I brought my papers, went and met the chair, and I got my letter of appointment. It was a total miracle because it takes almost a year to get a faculty position. You have to go interview. In fact, you have to do like 3 series of interviews by the time they pick, the finalists. So the Lord literally gave me a job just like He had promised. Another major miracle. All right. So I get a job, I think. What else? Well, I think I get a job. The baby is come back. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was, let me see, what else am I missing out? What else am I? Oh yeah. So then after I got my position, then we had a new president at the university. And the new president comes and says, well, this year, nobody's getting a pay rise. Nobody is getting any pay rise. Everybody's getting the same, everybody's getting the same amount of money. Well, I had been working as a postdoc, which is, and since my boss, my employer at the time didn't have any money, I was doing part-time. I was barely making any money. So when the president came and said, nobody's getting any money at all, everybody's salary is staying the same, but I just got a faculty position. So I'm going to get a big bump in my salary. He said, I am not signing anything. I said nobody is getting any money. He refused to sign my contract. Everybody else's contract was signed. Mine was sitting at the table. He refused to sign it because he said, nobody, if I sign this paper, she's going to get a pay rise, and nobody's getting a pay rise. Another miracle God did. I do research and we apply for grants to get research. Guess what? I got an internal grant and I got an NIH grant. With the NIH grant, there's a big chunk of money that goes to the school. And believe it or not, at the time in my department, I was the only one who had an NIH grant. And so they don't want to let go of that money because they get, indirect costs, whatever Trump is actually trying to take that out. But they get a big chunk of that money. And so they're like, she's the only one who has a grant in this department. How can you refuse to sign her papers? So he ended up signing my papers. A big miracle. And so I just had so many miracles. I think I probably skipped some of them, but that was the big picture. Right. Although my friend Dorothy gave me a glowing introduction last week, she said I was smart. I can tell you I was not that smart. I barely squeaked in. I barely squeaked into Asumbi Girls. I barely squeaked into Alliance Girls. But it was the hand of the Lord that opened the door for me to get there. I barely squeezed in to make it to the United States. And I had to struggle to even get to, whatever position that I have. But it's all glory and honor to God. In all of this, in all of my journey, what I have seen, what I shared with you last week is about prayer. It is prayer that has sustained me. It is praying with the saints that has sustained us every step of the way. I had people praying for me. I had people praying with me. I had so many verses that I stood on. I would speak. I remember when I was pregnant with my son, my last one, I would start saying Psalms 23. I would just say, Psalms, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, thou walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no ill, for thou art with me. And sometimes when I was stuck in Kenya, the Lord would say, Catherine, am I enough for you? You keep saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Am I really enough for you? If you lost everything and I'm all that you have, would you still be content? Would you still be happy? And I had to come to a place where I said, Lord, you are enough. It doesn't matter what happens in my life. You are enough for me. Another verse that the Lord used to encourage me, that was in Job. In Job, I think it says, even though he slays me, still I will follow. And so I came to a point, I said, Lord, I have nowhere to go. I don't even have a job. I don't, it's like I'm all alone. But I'm going to follow you no matter what. No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. I am sticking with you. I'm going to follow you no matter what happens. And so when I shared about prayer last week, I was actually speaking from my life. I have been in that position. I am still in there where I am praying, sometimes with groanings that cannot be uttered and not giving up. but knowing that God is faithful. It says, faithful is he who called you, who also will do it. Our God is faithful. And sometimes, and he also says, when you ask for bread, he does not give you a stone. When you ask for fish, he does not give you a snake. Sometimes your prayer has not been answered because what you think is bread is actually a stone. He's waiting to give you the bread. Sometimes the bread that he's giving us, we don't like it because we want the bread that, that comes in our way. But sometimes his bread looks different. But we have to come to a place of surrender, knowing that he's good. He is good all the time. It's his goodness that leads us to repentance. And so we just have to trust that he's faithful. It says, seek, ask, knock, anybody. And I would read that as, you mean, Lord, you say anybody who asks? It says that anybody who asks receives. And so I was so encouraged. I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm asking, I'm seeking, I'm knocking. And so that, again, has been my stance in a place of prayer. There are many things that I'm still praying for that I haven't seen answers. But again, I have to come to a place of the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. If I never answer this prayer, will you still love me? And I've come to a place I know, yes, Lord, it doesn't matter. I love you. And so I think that's kind of the gist of my testimony. And I've tried to share as much as I can remember, but it's all glory and honor to God. And it's just an encouragement to all of us to never give up, to trust that sometimes the answer may be no, but it may be what's best for us in that season because he knows what's good for us. He says, for I know the plans I have for you, they're plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. And so we have to trust that God's plans for us, sometimes they're even better than we think for ourselves. It's better than the plans we can make for ourselves. In fact, if I look back, way back at Asumbi, if somebody told me one day I'd be in the United States, I'd said, no way, never. So his plans are always better for us than we know because of his goodness. He's so good. He's so good. Even in the midst of a storm, he is still good. And so that's my testimony. And bless you all. I just encourage you. Don't give up on our God. Keep going. You guys are doing an amazing thing, meeting every night. Keep doing it because God is good. Faithful is he who called you, who also will do it. Amen.